She is coming later. Kwon Tae-young said it the way he said most things about his wife, casually, dismissively, with the specific carelessness of someone who has long since stopped considering that the subject of their words might deserve more careful handling. He was standing at the center of the Grand Intercontinental Seoul's private banquet hall, with a champagne flute in one hand and 10 years of carefully constructed success sitting on his shoulders like a second skin. Around him, his university classmates moved through the room in the particular way people move at reunions, performing, comparing, calculating, pretending not to calculate. Tae-young was very good at this game. He had arrived 40 minutes early, greeted everyone personally, made sure his entrance was witnessed by the right people. His suit was custom. His watch was the kind that required no introduction. His company, KTY Corporation, had been featured in 3 business publications in the past year, and he had made sure at least 2 of those features were visible on his phone's lock screen in case anyone asked. Jang Min-soo appeared at his elbow. Loud, familiar, the kind of presence that fills a room without improving it. "So where is this wife of yours?" Min-soo asked. "We have been hearing about her for years, and nobody has met her." Tae-young smiled. "She is coming. She is—" He paused, chose his word carefully. "Simple. Do not expect too much." Across the city in the bedroom of their apartment, Favor stood in front of the mirror. The pink gown caught the light and held it. She looked at her reflection for a long moment. Then she picked up her clutch and smiled. Tae-young had met Favor in their 3rd year of university. She had been sitting 2 rows ahead of him in an economics lecture. The one he attended only occasionally and always regretted missing because the professor was genuinely brilliant. On the day he finally showed up, she had been the one asking questions that made the professor stop and think before answering. He had introduced himself afterward. She had looked at him with the specific, unhurried assessment of someone who was not immediately impressed by confidence alone, and that had intrigued him more than anything else could have. They had studied together first, then eaten together, then become inseparable in the quiet, organic way that genuine connections form, without announcement or performance, simply by spending time together and discovering that the time was always better than the time before it. She had been extraordinary then, sharp and warm and deeply curious about everything. She had graduated top of their economics cohort, a fact that their classmates had noted with genuine respect, and that Tae-young had celebrated loudly and proudly at the time. He had married her 2 years after graduation, and somewhere in the years between that graduation celebration and tonight he had celebrated. Success had arrived for him quickly, and it had arrived loudly. A government contract, then an international partnership, then a Gangnam office, and a profile in a business magazine, and dinner invitations from people whose names he had previously only read about. And with every new level, Favor had seemed somehow smaller. Not because she had changed, because he had started looking at her differently, through the eyes of the rooms he was now entering rather than through his own. Aurelius Capital had been registered quietly in Favor's name 4 years ago. Not secretly in the way that implies concealment or deception, simply privately. The way that people who have learned that their gifts are safest when kept close to themselves keep things private. She had told no one because there was no one in her immediate life who she trusted to receive the information the way it deserved to be received. Tae-young would have taken it from her somehow. Not deliberately, perhaps, not maliciously, but his need to be the most impressive person in every room they shared had a way of consuming things that threatened that position. She had watched it happen with her ideas, her observations, her professional opinions, all of them absorbed into his narrative or dismissed before they could establish their own gravity. She was not going to let it happen to Aurelius Capital. She had started it with her own savings, money she had been accumulating quietly since their 2nd year of marriage from consulting work she did remotely for international firms, work that Tae-young knew about in the vague, distracted way he knew about most things concerning her life. Within 2 years, Aurelius Capital had grown into something that required her full attention, and she had given it that attention from the study in their apartment, while Tae-young attended business dinners and networking events and came home talking about his own company with the enthusiasm of a man who had never considered that the most interesting business in their household might not be his. The investment in KTY Corporation shares had begun in year 3, quietly, systematically, legally. By the morning of the reunion, Aurelius Capital held 51% of KTY Corporation shares. Tae-young was running a company his wife owned, The reunion was in full swing by 8 p.m. Tai Yang had positioned himself perfectly, near the center of the room where he could be seen from every angle, surrounded by the classmates whose opinions had always mattered most to him. Minsu was beside him as always, loud and enthusiastic, providing the kind of audience that Taeyang had always found most comfortable. The conversation had turned to success stories. Who had built what? Who was running which company? Who had exceeded expectations and who had quietly disappointed? Taeyang had contributed generously to this conversation. KTY Corporation's revenue figures rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. His Gangnam office, his international partnerships, his upcoming expansion into Southeast Asia. His classmates listened with the particular attention people give to someone who is clearly winning at the game they are all playing. "And your wife?" Park Ji-ho asked from across the circle. His voice was casual, but his eyes were attentive in the specific way they always were when favor came up in conversation. "What is she doing these days?" Taeyang waved his hand slightly. "She is at home mostly. She does some consulting work here and there. Nothing significant." He smiled. "She is better suited to the home environment? Not everyone is built for the corporate world." Ji-ho looked at him for a moment without responding. Then the room shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. The way a room shifts when something has entered it that is drawing attention the way certain things simply draw attention, not by announcing itself, but by simply being undeniable. Taeyang turned and stopped breathing for approximately 3 seconds. The woman standing at the entrance of the banquet hall was wearing a pink gown. Not the tentative, apologetic pink of someone unsure of their choice. A deep, confident rose gold that caught the chandelier light and released it slowly, structured at the shoulders, fitted through the body and flowing into a train that moved behind her, like something deliberate. Her makeup was precise and warm. Her hair was pinned in a sculptural style that showed the clean lines of her face and the specific stillness of her expression. She stood at the entrance for exactly 4 seconds without moving. 4 seconds was enough. The conversations nearest the door dropped first, then the ones behind those. Then a wave of redirected attention moved through the room the way these things always move, from the outside in, unstoppable once started. Taeyang watched from across the room as his classmates, people he had gone to university with, people who had known him for 15 years, turned toward this woman with the collective involuntary attention of a room encountering something genuinely extraordinary. Minsu let out a low sound beside him. "Who is that?" Taeyang did not answer. He was staring, not because he recognized her, because he did not. The woman moved into the room with the unhurried ease of someone who had been in rooms like this before and had long since stopped needing them to validate her presence. She accepted a champagne glass from a passing waiter, smiled at something a nearby classmate said to her, tilted her head slightly in a way that was. Taeyang's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. That tilt. He knew that tilt. The recognition arrived the way the most devastating things arrive. Not with a crash, but with a slow, terrible clarity that started at the edges of his understanding and moved inward until it was impossible to look away from. The tilt of her head, the specific way she held her champagne glass, the small private smile she made when something amused her. Not performing it for the room, but simply having it, the way she had always simply had it in the 14 years he had known her. Favor, his wife, standing in the center of his university reunion in a rose gold gown that had turned every head in the room, including his, before he even knew who he was looking at. He did not move for a long moment. Around him, his classmates were already gravitating toward her, drawn by the specific quality of her presence, the way people are drawn to things that are genuinely compelling, rather than merely impressive. He watched Ji-ho reach her first, watched his oldest friend's face shift from polite greeting to genuine recognition, to something that looked remarkably like unsurprised delight. Minsu was still looking at her from across the room. "Somebody needs to introduce me to that woman," he said, then turned to Taeyang. "Do you know who she is?" Taeyang set his champagne glass down on the nearest surface. "Yes," he said quietly. "Well, who is she?" He looked at Minsu for a moment with an expression that Minsu would later describe to his wife as the face of a man realizing something he could not unrealize. "She is my wife," he said. Minsu stared at him, then looked back at Favor, then back at him. "That," Minsu said slowly, "is your wife." "Yes. The one you said was simple." Tai Yang said nothing. The announcement came at 9 p.m. The reunion committee had arranged a brief awards segment, a tradition from their university days carried forward into every gathering. Most successful alumni, most improved, most likely to have been right about everything they said in university. The host, a cheerful classmate named Dong Hyun, who had gone into broadcasting and brought all of it with him, took the microphone with practiced ease and began working through the categories with the warm energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed this part of the evening. Tai Yang had positioned himself near the front. He had been expecting this moment, had been quietly confident about it for weeks. KTY Corporation's numbers were strong. His profile was high. He had mentally prepared a modest but impressive acceptance speech that acknowledged his team while making clear that the vision had been entirely his. And finally, Dong Hyun said, his voice carrying the specific elevation of someone saving the best for last, most successful alumni of the decade. This was not a close vote. He smiled. The voting was not even particularly interesting because one name appeared on almost every single ballot submitted. Tai Yang straightened slightly. The founder and CEO of Aurelius Capital, a private investment firm whose portfolio includes significant holdings across 17 Korean corporations, including. Dong Hyun paused and looked down at his card. Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of surprise quickly controlled. Including a majority shareholding in KTY Corporation. The room shifted. Tae Yang heard KTY Corporation and felt something move through him that he could not immediately name. Please, welcome. Dong Hyun looked up, smiled directly at the woman in the rose gold gown. Favor Kwon. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then the room erupted. Not the polite applause of a formal event, the genuine, full-throated reaction of 300 people processing multiple pieces of information simultaneously and reacting to all of them at once. Favor Kwon, Aurelius Capital, majority shareholding in KTY Corporation. Most successful alumni. The woman in the rose gold gown who had walked into this reunion and turned every head before anyone knew her name. His wife. Tae Yang stood completely still in the center of the room as Favor moved toward the stage with the same unhurried ease she had carried all evening. He watched her accept the award from Dong Hyun, watched her shake his hand warmly, watched her turn to face the room with the composed, unbothered expression of someone who had known this moment was coming and had dressed accordingly. Beside him, Minsu had gone completely quiet for the first time all evening. Across the room, Jiho was applauding with genuine enthusiasm, the specific energy of someone whose faith in a person has just been publicly confirmed in the best possible way. Tae Yang heard KTY Corporation again in his mind. Majority shareholding. He reached for his phone with hands that were not entirely steady, opened the KTY Corporation shareholder portal, entered his credentials, waited 3 seconds for the page to load. The largest single shareholder entry had always shown his name. It no longer showed his name. Aurelius Capital, 51% majority shareholder. He read it 3 times. The champagne glass he had picked up again slipped from his fingers. A waiter caught it before it hit the floor. Favor's speech lasted 4 minutes. She did not mention Tai Yang once, not because she was performing restraint for the room, but because what she had to say had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the 15 years of work and vision and quiet, relentless building that had brought her to this stage in this room on this evening. She spoke about Aurelius Capital, how it started, what it stood for, where it was going. She spoke about the Korean corporate landscape and the specific opportunities she had identified that others had overlooked. She spoke with the fluency of someone who had spent 15 years thinking about these things and had never once had a room willing to listen until now. The room listened, completely, without distraction, with the specific quality of attention that belongs to people in the presence of someone who genuinely knows what they are talking about and is not performing the knowing. When she finished, the applause was immediate and complete. Jiho was on his feet first. Minsu, to his credit, followed 3 seconds later with the expression of a man rearranging everything he thought he knew about the evening he had just spent. Tae Yang did not applaud. He was looking at his phone. His legal team had been notified automatically when the shareholder portal was accessed. 3 messages had come in while Favor was speaking, each one more carefully worded than the last, but all of them saying the same thing in different ways. Aurelius Capital's majority position was legal, properly acquired, fully documented. KTY Corporation belonged to his wife. It had belonged to his wife for 11 months. He had spent 11 months running a company that his wife owned, presenting its numbers at dinner parties, referencing it in conversations about his success, building his entire identity around something that had quietly and completely ceased to be his. He put his phone in his pocket and looked up at the stage where his wife was accepting congratulations from their classmates with the warm, composed grace of someone who had been ready for this moment for a very long time. The remainder of the evening passed around Taiyang like weather. People moved, conversations happened, music played. He stood in various positions around the room, holding various glasses, and said things when things were required of him, but none of it connected to anything real inside him, because everything real inside him was occupied with a single rearranging thought that kept presenting itself from new angles, no matter how many times he tried to set it down. She had built this. While he was at his business dinners, she had been building this. While he was telling classmates she was better suited to the home environment, she had been acquiring majority shares in his company. While he was performing his success for every room he entered, she had been quietly and completely outbuilding him in the same city, sometimes in the same apartment, always without his knowledge or acknowledgement or support. Ji-ho found him near the window at 10:30 p.m. They stood together in silence for a moment. "You knew," Taeyang said. "Not an accusation, just a recognition." "I suspected," Ji-ho said carefully. "She was always the sharpest person in our cohort, Taeyang. You knew that once." "I forgot." "Yes," Ji-ho said simply. "You did." Another silence. "She graduated top of our class," Taeyang said quietly, almost to himself. "I celebrated that. I was proud of that. I told everyone." He stopped. "When did I stop seeing it?" Ji-ho looked at him for a long moment. "When it stopped being about her," he said, "and started being about you." Across the room, Favor was exchanging cards with three classmates who had spent the evening discovering that the most extraordinary person at their reunion had been hiding in plain sight for 15 years. She was warm and genuine and completely at ease, the version of herself that had always existed and that Taiyang had slowly and systematically covered with his need to be the one who shone. She caught his eye once across the room, held his gaze for a moment, then looked away, not with anger, not with triumph, with the clear, settled expression of a woman who has closed a chapter and is already thinking about the next one. The following morning, Taiyang arrived at KTY Corporation headquarters to find that the transition of operational control had already been initiated by Aurelius Capital's legal team overnight. His office remained his for the transition period. His salary continued. His role during the handover was clearly defined and professionally respectful. She had handled it the way she handled everything, with complete competence and zero drama. He sat at his desk and looked at the city through his floor-to-ceiling windows for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and typed a message to the email address listed on the Aurelius Capital website. "I would like to meet, not about the company. I understand the company completely. I would like to meet because I owe you something that has been a long time coming and that I should have given you years ago. If you are willing, I am ready to finally say it properly." He sent it, then sat back and waited. Across the city, in the Aurelius Capital headquarters, Favor's assistant flagged the message as it came in. Favor read it at her desk between two back-to-back meetings. She read it once, then set her phone face down on the desk and went back to work. Because that was always what she did. And nothing, not a reunion, not a pink gown, not a majority shareholding, not a long overdue message from a man who had spent 15 years forgetting who she was, could change that. She had always known who she was. She had simply been patient enough to let the room find out. The moral lesson of this story is that never let the room you are trying to impress determine the value of the person standing beside you. Because the day will come when that room finds out who they really are. And everything you said about them before that moment will define you far more than it ever defined them.